This is the Dreadful Podcast from TV Podcast Industries, and we're talking about Lovecraft Country, Season 1, Episode 7, I Am.
We are here because we did not believe them when they told us our rage was not ladylike. We did not believe them when they said our violence goes too far. We did not believe them when they said the hatred that we feel for our enemies is not godlike. They say that to women like us because they know what happens when we are free. Free to hate when we must. Free to kill when we must. Free to bring destruction when we must. That is our freedom. That is our prayer, no matter what they think of us after we grind them into the dust. That is our love!
Welcome back to the Dreadful Podcast, fellow Dreadfuls. This is episode 7 of season 1 of Lovecraft Country, where we are discussing the episode I Am. I am one of your hosts, John.
I am one of your other hosts, Derek. And my mind is blown for this episode. Yeah, this is a fun one. This should be a good chat about episode 7 of Lovecraft Country, because there's some great stuff in here. It's so laden with references that I'm sure we missed loads of them as well.
Yeah, I searched for one of the speeches through this episode. It sounded like it was James Baldwin again, as we heard in episode 1, but I just couldn't find any reference to it at all. So, look, we'll come to it anyway when we do in our discussion, our spoiler-filled discussion of this week's episode of Lovecraft Country. So when we do, I'll certainly be asking any of our listeners who maybe know the reference. It would be great. It sounded very interesting. I kind of wanted to hear the whole thing, but yeah, we'll come to that in due course.
Absolutely. I feel like as soon as we finish recording, we'll be able to search it and find it on the internet, but just couldn't find it before we started. But excellent stuff in this episode. Before we get into our discussion of episode 7, we did get another review over on Apple Podcasts, which is awesome. Thanks so much to Love Bliss Joy, who left us a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts in the UK. Love Bliss Joy says, I think these two guys, John and Derek, are brilliant. We Lovecraft Country. A lot of sensible comments and also very informative, as well as a bit of humour thrown in. One of the best podcasts around. Greetings from Liverpool. YNWA is the side off from Love Bliss Joy. That's You'll Never Walk Alone, isn't it?
It certainly is. Yes, the famous song that is sung around Anfield, which is the home of Liverpool Football Club. Yes.
Interesting. That's only a couple of miles from your home.
It certainly is. Well, I'm a part-time supporter. I can't say I'm a massive soccer fan, but I do follow Liverpool Football Club. Yeah. My father was an Evertonian, so of course the rivalry ensues within the home, or it did as kids, because yes, myself and my brother, I think just purely to be the opposite of my dad, were Liverpool supporters.
Always happens. Happens. All my brothers hate Arsenal because my dad was an Arsenal supporter. But anyway, this is not a football podcast, but thanks so much for that feedback, Love Bliss Joy. If you want to leave a piece of feedback like that, a little review for us over on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you can leave reviews, follow us on TV Podcast Industries or The Dreadful Podcast from TV Podcast Industries, where we're covering Lovecraft Country. We'd love to get a few reviews up about our podcast, because we're getting some really good listeners, getting really, really good feedback about
Absolutely. The feedback's really been very, very good. Really thoughtful, really thought-provoking. So it's great getting those views. And you can send in your feedback to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. We'll read it out on the podcast in our feedback section. You can also go over to our Twitter handle @tvpodindustries. And finally, you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries. And of course, as Derek was saying previously, please subscribe to the podcast over on any good or evil podcast catcher podcast player of your choice. Yet please support the podcast, because supporting the podcast is spreading the love, as we say. And of course, rate us, leave a review. Any support for the podcast is really very much appreciated.
Absolutely. Let's get into our discussion about episode 7. Lots to talk about this time. First up, the episode was directed by Charlotte Sealing. She's directed episodes of tons of TV shows, from Wayward Pines and The Strain, which are much more kind of horror themed, all the way to Homeland quite recently. She directed 2 episodes of Homeland, one in season 4 and one in season 7. So, has been around quite a long time directing great TV.
Yeah, good spread of experience there. Yeah, different genres.
Yeah. The episode itself, the teleplay, was written by Misha Green, the showrunner, and Shannon Houston. Shannon Houston is the co-host of the official Lovecraft Country podcast, which is a really interesting listen every week. Loads of stuff I would never pick up on the episodes without listening to their podcast. So that comes out just after the episodes air as well, just like ours. So if you're listening to just our podcast, definitely go listen to theirs as well, because it's really interesting having the behind the scenes kind of look from Shannon Houston.
Yeah, definitely.
Each of the episodes. So really interesting stuff. John, I think we're going to have a summary for this episode because it's so complex. Let's see how we did on putting it together with your synopsis for season 1, episode 7 of Lovecraft Country. I am.
Sure. After going to Ardham County, Hypolyta's journey of discovery continues through time and space after unlocking the secret of Hiram's orrery. Elsewhere, Atticus and his father's relationship hits a new low as he encounters Montrose and Sammy at his dad's flat while looking for information about his mother's side of the family. As Tic attempts to track down the Book of Names in St. Louis, he is warned by Leti that Hypolytta has the orrery and could be in danger. At a space observatory in Kansas, Hypolytta activates the device, just as members of Captain Lancaster's police have her at gunpoint. Atticus arrives to help his aunt, but during the fight with the cops, a rip in space and time opens up, and both Tic and Hippolyta are flung through the tear. From the Kansas Observatory to a high-tech cell with the being I Am, Hippolyta is then teleported to Paris to dance with Josephine Baker. From there, Hippolyta travels onwards to ancestral Africa with Confederate soldiers, and further into the sci-fi world of her daughter's comics, with her dead husband George. Her odyssey through multiple worlds is transformative and empowering, as she learns about her thoughts, her feelings, her desires, and ultimately who she is and what freedom means. Back in Kansas, Atticus is flung back out of the Tur and into the observatory, carrying a book written by Geroge Freeman. But where has he come from, and what has he seen?
That's a great synopsis of the episode, I think. That does put together a lot of the interesting strands and strains that were going on throughout this episode. This was fascinating. This made me feel, every episode so far this season has been so different. You don't know what you're going to get as you come into the episode. And this one made me feel, I wonder, is there some people coming in wondering what the hell is going on and still confused? Because that can turn people off sometimes when you're watching an episode, even knowing there's only an hour there to watch. Some people will turn off 20 minutes in going, I have no idea what's going on here.
Oh yeah, this was a bit of a brain melt, to be honest, from my side. It was good to rewatch the episode a second time just to kind of really absorb everything here, because yeah, we are taken on that journey with Hypolyta, and my goodness, it is it's just so good. I love these kind of stories, and I really like the fact that, horror and sci-fi, it tells stories that just aren't told or can't be told in that way through other mediums, or a much grander sort of overarching kind of look at those themes, which are maybe played out in a more realistic story on a smaller scale, like The Family. I think as well, something like science fiction writing and horror writing, certainly in 40s, 50s, 60s, the time where I really enjoy that kind of sci-fi, really did touch on themes that I think meant they were read in that pulp way by a lot more people. And I don't think it was always understood by the consumers of that material, some of the themes that were being discussed openly. Yeah. I think the classic example for me is a book called Forever War. And that really effectively is the Vietnam War out in space.
Right.
And it takes the soldiers so long to travel to this planet so far away from Earth and back again that the humans on Earth, this war means nothing to them.
Right.
And that they have no conceptual understanding of the sacrifices and the blood being shed in their name so far away. And it's a really great science fiction novel.
Yeah, and that's a great way to tell of the experiences that the author had when he was in Vietnam, something like the Forever War. That kind of storyline sounds really interesting.
Yeah, the author's Joe Hadelman, and yeah, I mean, he did a whole series of these, and it was really interesting. And I think in the same way that, you know, science fiction has talked about effectively genetic engineering or for society, or even the dark side of eugenics, whether it's the dark side of politics, whether it's the use of drugs, you know, particularly someone like, say, Philip K. Dick, but also in terms of race as well. You know, you think of Star Trek to some degree, and what that sort of showed in terms of meeting different beings from other worlds, this diversity in outer space, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Really interesting, as much as the diversity that they had on the bridge of the Enterprise.
Exactly. But we're also both people, one of us from the UK, one of us from Ireland. We clearly can't talk about this episode without talking about Doctor Who and the ability that having a character traveling through time and space gave them the ability to talk about things that wouldn't normally be talked about on the BBC over the course of the 55-year history of that show. You know, that show continues to be able to reinvent itself. I think, in fact, only last season they had an episode talking about Rosa Parks and her contribution to the rights struggle in the US. Being able to tell those stories is really a function of time-traveling sci-fi, and I love that they've incorporated it into this show. And it's not a story about history. It's a story about Hypolytta finding herself in this episode.
Yeah, exactly.
What a great use of this mechanism that to save Geroge Freeman, her husband.
Absolutely.
You know? It seemed like that opening scene was them at the house, her going, right, I'm going to definitely get this working so I can save him. But let's get into our discussion about the episode a bit more in detail. John, what do you want to talk about in this episode?
Well, it's Hippolyta's journey of self-discovery, really. And I think that it may not have started out in that way. I think it was a way possibly I think part of it was her own curiosity around the device and her love of the stars and astrology. But also, I think part of it could have been she just maybe wondered, what could this machine do that could impact George, and finding out the truth about George. I actually thought it was more she wanted to try and find out the truth about George with it, maybe get him back once that had clicked with her. Okay. If she thought that could be done. Yeah. And in effect she does, in this episode in a way. And I suppose this whole thing of Hippolyta's journey is that it's not just timey-wimey. It is in the grand tradition of multiple worlds, like in the Marvel universe with the multiverse, that there are numerous different worlds where different things are playing out. That relativity of the same person living out different lives.
In different places.
And in different places.
And I was trying to work out that the second time I saw the episode, I noticed that what she'd seen at the lodge, at Ardham Lodge, when she goes, is this kind of plaque. It's a piece of mural that has multiple lines at varying different degrees. And that's what she connects back to this orrery that she's stolen a few episodes before. So this is an interpretation of the multiple worlds theory, that all of these things are on a similar path, but they're slightly at different angles. They're slightly
exactly. It was a semicircle. It was almost like a protractor.
Yeah.
And she recognizes this. She also finds out, and she's absolutely certain then that George was at the lodge there in Ardham County. She sees her daughter's comic book, a scrap of one of the pages.
Yeah.
But I think with what Hypolytta goes through here, and we have to say that straight off the bat, is that Tic, Atticus, also goes through something similar, maybe not in the same way as Hypolytta, but he is also flung through this this tear, in time, in space, at least, that she has generated by activating this observatory in Kansas.
Yes.
And I suppose the other great reference about Kansas is with Dorothy and her trip to the Emerald City and the Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah, although it took me ages, the longitude and latitudes that keep coming up throughout the episode. I checked every one of them. Most of them, if they are on Earth, they're in the middle of the ocean, but the only one that is definitely a place is the first one that she follows from the Orary itself. She follows to Kansas, and that's where this observatory is based, effectively, in the TV show. Not in real life. You can't go and see that observatory, as far as I know. But they're messing with me. They just made me spend about half an hour looking up longitude and latitude. So either I don't know how to read longitude and latitude, or none of them are places on Earth.
Well, it's not to say that they're not longitude and latitude. It is, longitude, latitude, and time. I think you've got the 3 coordinates there of time and space. Yeah. But it's in a different world, so it has no bearing on the world that we know, technically. I think that's what it is, and that's why putting them into, so for example, for the first teleportation that Hypolytta does, where she ends up in Paris, obviously everyone knows Paris is in France, roughly where that is. Yeah. It's in the Northern Hemisphere. You put in the coordinates, and the coordinates are actually for the Labrador Sea off the east coast of Canada and the west coast of Greenland. Yeah. The current, the Labrador current there in the Atlantic. So
it did make me speculate whether they were just saying Hippolyta's at sea until she returns home. She's going through a change, but this is totally me reading into stuff.
Yeah, it certainly could be.
And there's so much other stuff in the episode. Definitely disregard the stuff that makes no sense to you and focus on the real story that's going on, I think, is what I found for this episode. We'll get through the general details of the show, because it is really well written, really well put together. I'm sure, as I said before, I'm sure there's stuff we've missed, but certainly Hippolyta's story here is cool.
I think it is. I really, really loved the experiences that she has here. They were in part funny and really sort of weird, and also just really moving to see someone connect about herself to her past life and then what she has done in these other worlds. I thought was really moving. I thought it was really just great empowerment, and that transformation of her understanding. Like the whole trip, she goes to Paris where she's dancing with Josephine Baker, which is fantastic. Yeah. And for me, I just love the awkwardness of when she arrives. She's there on stage. She hasn't got the dance moves at all going on. She certainly doesn't know to rip off the bra for the finale of that dance move. And, you can see all the French girls really complaining about her.
I love that. All the Americans come here and make us all look unprofessional. Hilarious.
But I loved her. That kind of fish out of water where she's just kind of stumbling on the stage, trying to keep up with the moves, kind of in effect sort of, shrug her shoulders because it's like, I can't do. And then the look on Hippolyta's face when she realizes that there is a semi-naked, off with the bra, finale, the big climax to the dance number in Paris was just, so good. I was chuckling away to myself. Absolutely. With Hippolyta's reactions to all of this. Thought it was really nicely done.
But I love that she lives out the dream, though, in a sense.
Yeah, exactly.
She's had this moment where she's with this being in another planet, effectively, who says to her, "Where do you want to be? What's the one place you wanted? If you wanted to go somewhere, where would you go?" She almost instantly calls out just going to dance with Josephine Baker in Paris. And she lives out the dream. She has Josephine Baker connect eyes with her early on in this dance sequence. And afterwards, when all the other girls are criticizing her performance, Baker teaches her the moves. She has that moment. So, for me, if you had a moment where I could go anywhere in the world, it would be, I'd love to be, on stage with Prince and his band, and having him afterwards instruct me in how to join the band. Like, that's the absolute dream of someone that's a fan like that, Josephine Baker is most well known as being one of the first and one of the most famous black performers in the world. She traveled the world. She moved to Paris, worked and danced there for years, and became worldwide famous.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I love this idea that this is an inspiration for Hypolytta, and that's the first place she wants to go. She's a real thinking character, Hypolytta.
Yeah, she's great.
She has such a journey that she goes on. I said story earlier on. It's not a story, it's a journey that she's going on throughout this episode. It's a really good way you put it earlier on, John. This is her journey that she has to go through to find who she should be if the rest of the world hadn't interrupted her. In the same way we had with Ruby a couple of episodes ago, this is what happened to her when she got interrupted. She lost all of her abilities to follow her dreams and her goals.
Exactly. So, and, Hypolyta is a clever lady, so the nuance of what she's experiencing isn't lost. And I think there's a few things I've just found, I thought they were so meaningful. They really kind of got under my skin. I'm really kind of connected, I suppose, in many respects. But we do have to kind of start off is that the moment that she is ripped through this tear, she is separated from Atticus, and she ends up on a planet somewhere, with robots escorting her to what seems to be a cell. And I loved the black lady robot with the afro hair. I thought it was amazing, absolutely amazing. And all the time here, Hypolyta thinks she is a prisoner. She's looking to try and escape. And this robot lady says, "You're not a prisoner. Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be?" And effectively, it's that she can go anywhere she wants from this location, depending on her desires, her thoughts, her feelings of who she wants to be and where she wants to be. And it ends up first off, off she goes, I suppose, to Paris with Josephine Baker. But there's a real nice moment just before she jumps again, and it's that melancholy of her where she says, "I thought I had everything I wanted." It's just that the white folk found a smart way of lynching me without me noticing. They had me be exactly what they wanted me to be. She thought she had everything until she came here. I hate they made me feel small, these dreams. And I just thought that was really poignant. I thought that was so well delivered. And I have to say, Ingenue Ellis, oh wow, she's just phenomenal in this episode. I
such a strong
absolutely adore her. I think at this moment, I've had Ruby, who is my personal hero, and I think Hypolyta is here for me. I loved this journey.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you, John. We saw with, as you mentioned, Ruby, played by Wunmi Masaku. We saw with Jamie Chung as Jaya, and we've seen all throughout the season, we've seen this amazing performance from Journey Smollett as Leti. The women on this show, the casting of all of them has been so strong that each one of them has carried their roles so well. They are just, each week we get a new story with a fantastic female actor in this show that's really carrying their role and carrying a full episode. I don't want to, certainly not criticizing Ingenue Ellis for the previous performance that she's had, but you wouldn't think from the lines that she was given throughout the season so far that this was the character you were going to see. And you see the reason why in this episode. You see the whole reason is her character that she was playing all the way along is effectively the character that Hypolyta has had to portray her whole life. And that's why she's melted in the background. That's why she's been the caring aunt, the nice mother, the one that's sitting at home crying over her lost love. That's all that she's been given. The reason for that is because she had all of this going for her in episode 7. Well, this voyage of discovery that she goes on.
Well, I think that's to the conversation with Josephine Baker at the bar. She was publishing this travel companion for black people in America, to go to, safe places. And, they had a successful business. They had a good home. And it's because that was what they thought they wanted and what they needed. And in fact, it's the box you're put in. And I think you can extrapolate that to a lot of people that, if you end up going through these routines where, that you're just on this cycle of going to the shops, going to bed, getting up, doing all of this work 9 to 5, or work becomes to take over your life. And it's like, how free are you? And I think it's I think what Hypolytta is encompassing here is more than just that, but it also includes that.
Yeah.
It includes that. It also includes the fact that she is being put down and kept small by the society, you know, in 1950s America that she lives in because of the racism and the prejudice and the bias. But it doesn't just stop there. I think there's another great moment, of her and George, in bed.
Absolutely.
And, you know, she doesn't let George off the hook here. She says, "You stood by and let me shrink myself. You know, I tried to name something. I can name anything I want to myself, and I can become that." You know, she's explaining these multi-world equations, I think the May equations, to George, who's kind of just woken up. So I think I would be a little sort of dazed and confused.
She's like, "Oh, remember that time I talked to you about the multiverse theory?" He's like, "Yes." Yeah,
exactly. But it's just like, you know, I tried to name something, which is the meteorite, which was prevented for her.
Yeah, it was taken away because she was black and given to the daughter of another astronomer in Europe because
she was white.
We can't allow this black girl to to name the star, you know, or
and
the meteor. Sorry,
you know, and so I tried to name something, and after that I shrank, and you stood by and let me shrink myself. You didn't do anything to stop that. So, you know, she doesn't even let George off the hook, even though you can tell she's really happy to be lying back next to him in bed. There's a moment where she realizes she can't leave, I think, any stone unturned around this idea of freedom. And I just thought it was really spectacular. Yeah. She has another great sort of rallying cry as a leader in it looks like an African village somewhere. Certainly the architecture of the buildings look like that, but I could be totally mistaken. And again, the weirdness that she's effectively almost like in a gladiatorial circle. She eventually overcomes it. You can see the time coordinate ticking by as she learns and learns and learns until she's able to take down effectively her teacher and get this special helmet to lead the troops. And you see them
like the Spartans. From 300,
it almost looks like Spartans then, but then
this is Hypolytta.
Exactly. But then the people coming towards her are Confederate soldiers. So this was just really wacky.
Multiverse, remember? Yeah,
exactly. Multiverse, and it plays into what she wants and how she wants to see herself. So in a sense, in the summary, I called it ancestral African. That's something that she is connecting with. At the same time, in the bar with Josephine Baker, she says about how she has thoughts of killing white people. And I think here in this moment, those white people are given it's that special, it's the Confederate soldiers, the representation of the Confederacy and stuff like that. Or at least I could be overthinking it, but look, it's the way I'm kind of I view it. And you know, she has another really inspiring speech that after she kills this first wave of soldiers, you know, they don't want us to be free, whether it's free to kill or free to live, or free to love. And then she transports again after that next to George. And I just thought this was absolutely top class, A-star storytelling. Just loved every bit of it.
And one of the elements that I loved about that trip to see George, that travel through, you know, these are all her choices of discovery, as you say, John. She's not going to leave any stone unturned to get to the point of learning who is Hypolytta when she has no constraints, when she has that full freedom. And I love that moment with George when he looks at her and goes, "You've done all of this and you still chose to say you are George Freeman's wife." And she just kind of looks back with him with kind of an, "Oh no, honey, you don't understand what this is. This is me coming to tell you, yes, okay, I love you, absolutely, but this is me coming to tell you what you've also aided in my restriction and my shrinking. You are also one of the people that's responsible for it. Yes, I love you, but you also allowed me to shrink, knowing how big of a person I am, knowing how much of the world I was willing to explore before meeting you. You made me the mother of your daughter and your wife and the person who ran your business. I was an explorer. and you made me stay at home while you did the exploration. And he agrees and says, that was to keep you safe. I thought it was just me doing my duty, but that was to keep you safe. And I love that this is playing on a little touch early on when she's driving in Woody the car going off on this adventure on her own at the beginning of the episode. You see the biker that drives by and you see how much enjoyment Hypolytta has at seeing the rest of the world on her own, just on this journey, just a quick scene in the car. And it's so important for this character. And
that, in that moment, her and George hold hands and she takes them both off into this lovely, trippy sci-fi world that her daughter has created with the comic book.
I love that because
really good.
For a moment, I suppose we've gone through this few multiverse ideas, and I suppose the central theory of the multiverse concept is that there are infinite universes of infinite styles, of infinite ways, and she's found a way to traverse through all of them. So what's happening here is she found a way to traverse into the universe that her daughter created in her comic books, because she has the purple hair, just like the character that Dee has drawn, exactly like her adventurer mother, effectively. I love that. And, the ticking clock is really important. The coordinates come up and then you see the clock tick and they come back up and the clock ticks again, effectively, moving on, showing that she spends time in each of these different places. She actually does spend quite a long time with George in this universe that her daughter created, effectively. So it's really interesting. This was the choice she made at the end of this journey, is I can absolutely be all of these things. I can choose who I am. I can choose how to represent myself. And she is told by this being, this I am character, she's told, we can accept you here. You can just remove those things from yours, those things that allowed you to travel through all of these dimensions, all of these universes, exploring who you are. You can remove those, become part of us. You will never be able to go back to Earth, or you can go back to Earth exactly as you were beforehand with all of this knowledge, effectively. And she says, well, Dee needs me. So even though she had gone through the journey of discovery of who she is, she still knows she's all of that and also a mother, which is really important for her character. Again, another lovely character beat.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as well, in this moment, we get another speech here, but it's not by Hypolytta. It's a narration. And this is the one where I wondered whether it was James Baldwin. I wondered whether it was possibly Malcolm X. I really, I'm not entirely sure, and I could not find it anywhere because I found it fascinating. Where the male narrator is kind of saying, I think George and Hypolytta are kind of picking space flowers or something off these different strands. Let me just say as well, before I go into this, as a huge Doctor Strange fan, this was just like heaven as well. I think Hypolytta is my new Doctor Strange. I loved how she went through these different worlds, dare I say it, dimensions. But this narration that's being talked about whilst Hypolytta and George are picking space daisies is I don't have the full text because I just couldn't find it and I wasn't quick enough to write all of it down, but it says, you're not real. If you were, you would have some status in the rest of the world with the other nations. We're myths. I come to you not as the reality, but as the myth, because that's what black people are. A myth, I think he finishes with. Yeah. Like we didn't have subtitles, so it was difficult to get it all. Despite replaying that section. So I mean, for me, fellow Dreadfuls, if you know where this excerpt comes from, that would be fascinating to find out. Because I mean, I googled the hell out of this. I literally put in to Google what I had written down. So maybe I hadn't got it down accurate, but Google was like, came back and said, you don't have enough information here. And I was like, I've almost written out someone's excerpt from a speech, but it was probably too much information. But I just could not find it at all.
As I say, I'm guaranteeing once the episode airs, once it's on Twitter, there will be an entire wonderfully detailed document of who this is. But we're lucky enough to be able to see these episodes before it actually airs. So as soon as we see it on Monday, I'll mark a note in our show notes for the episode. I'll pop it in.
I found a lot of this stuff really fascinating. So it really made me want to find out more about some of this stuff. I just thought fair dues to Hypolyta. In trying to find the truth about George's death, she learns the greater truth about herself and what it really means to be free at so many different levels. And I kind of found that inspiring, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
I thought this was a great episode, with such a wonderful character played by a wonderful actor in Ingenue Ellis that, it was just so good.
Yeah, just a wonderful story of Hypolyta right in the center of this episode. Another episode that focuses on one character getting the story. This is very similar to the book. Each chapter of the book is kind of a chapter from the perspective of one individual character. Kind of like I think Game of Thrones does that a lot.
Yeah.
Where it's an individual chapter that doesn't touch the other stories. The chapters of the book are very similar to that, but this does have other stuff in it. But anything else on this particular moment?
I suppose the only thing is to note on this is that, as I say, we saw Atticus come back, not Hypolyta. Now, we don't know quite how time moves, whilst Hypolyta and Atticus are in these other worlds, what the difference in time is. Maybe Atticus was very quick there, but he certainly closed down the machine. So whether Hypolyta came through earlier, then she could be potentially trapped there. But I suspect the being I Am can open up another rift to get her back if that's how she chooses it. But it is just to say we haven't seen her come back through yet.
Right.
Despite it being more than likely that that's what will happen.
Yeah, that's true. She's still out there somewhere just before she comes back.
The truth is out there.
Yes.
Exactly.
But I do think you're right. I think that regardless of whether that portal is open or not, this being will be able to transfer her back. I wonder if she'll suddenly turn back up in Chicago without the car, and everybody's like, how did you get back here?
Well, I suppose the dangerous thing for her at the moment is that with Captain Lancaster's police officers arriving before they got pulled through that rift, one of them got thrown through. The other one was shot by Hypolyta.
And then the gun handed to Atticus, and I'm sorry to question what was going on here, but he threw a live police officer through that hole, taking care of him. Genuinely throw the other guy through, and then you're pretty safe.
Well, I was thinking that myself.
Why didn't they jump the body?
But with Atticus returning, you hear sirens outside. He legs it, taking the key and everything else.
Runs. That's what it means.
Yeah, he runs. And but the thing is Dee's comic is there in the pool of blood next to the police officer, so that there is something that Lancaster's cops can use to track Hypolyta down, at least the Freemans, to Southside Chicago.
Just like any good artist, she signed her name on her lovely comic book work.
Yeah, absolutely. Her name is there in big, bold letters. So
that was lovely as well, though, because there was a kind of a moment when early on, right at the start of the episode, actually, when Hypolyta was going on her journey and Dee's not happy with her going. And Hypolyta says, but Dad always had the checklist. George always had the checklist they went through, and they all get a hug, and then he gets his comic to send him off on his adventuring around the country. And she thinks Dee has turned away and walked away from him, but actually Dee has written a little comic and stuck it in her mum's her food parcel that she's traveling with the factory. So lovely little touch there. There is still a relationship with them, even though Dee's not happy Mom's gone off on her own.
Definitely. But there was certainly some other elements going on here as well.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah, that's most of the stuff I want to talk about really is just the other stuff that surrounded what was going on, because I suppose after last week's episode being so focused on South Korea and having almost no connection to what was specifically happening in the main storyline, it was good to have all the other elements that were going on in the episode. It's almost half an hour before of the hour-long episode before Hypolyta takes that journey. So there are other things that are going on in the episode. We have a lot of elements with Tic and Leti and Ruby. We have Ruby effectively taking care of Dee, so Leti also goes over to kind of make it up with her sister after everything that happened.
Yeah, with the house and the big argument they had about their mother leaving money just to Leti, and she got the house.
Exactly. So that was like episode 4 or 3 or 4 when the last time they saw each other. So they haven't seen each other for a few episodes. Well, a few days now, let's say. So I wanted to just check a couple of questions here, really, as this episode goes on. So we started out the episode with Ruby. So Ruby and Leti are making up throughout this episode, but we started out the episode with Ruby speaking with Christina, finding the bodies of William and Dell. So Dell was the white woman that Ruby was transforming into, and William obviously being the man that Christina was transferring into. So that was a theory that we didn't know about, that they were keeping the dead bodies of these two people, using their blood to make this potion and being able to transfer into them and becoming them for a few hours effectively. So slightly, very different from what we thought was happening. But that's very interesting. So Dell is definitely the person that we saw at Ardham Lodge back in episode 1, episode 2, I think it was, who was being so cruel and treating Leti and George and Tic so badly. She's dead now, and her body is being used for Ruby effectively to move back and forth. Ruby, hearing all of this, tells Christina she wants to know absolutely everything that's going on. And Christina says to her, I didn't lie to you. She effectively is saying that she was in love with Ruby. She was treating her well the entire time, wanted to see what Ruby would experience living the life of a white person in the body of Dell, or Hillary, as she called herself. So that's a really interesting storyline. She starts it off by saying, this is about the Book of Names, the pages from the Book of Names, and it's about your family. So it sounds like she's told Ruby everything. So my question, and this is where it's getting to, my question is, Ruby and Leti sort out their problems. We see Leti finding the orrery that Hypolytta had stolen from their house, or taken from their house. Ruby's looking into the room and sees that Letty's noticed this. She calls Atticus, tells Atticus, Hypolytta had the orrery all along. Yeah? And I'm wondering whether Ruby is spying on her sister at the request of Christina. Did Christina say to her, here's all the information you need to know. Here's my reasoning behind everything I wanted to do. She says to her, I'm doing it for getting the ability to do magic, not to prove anything to my father, not for any other reason. I want the abilities that having magic will give me. The key, one of the keys to that is this orrery. When you find that, tell me all the information about it. So is Ruby working alongside Christina now that she understands the full details?
There's a high probability of that. I suppose the question that will need to be answered in the next few episodes is when Ruby sees Leti on the phone to Atticus to warn him that Hypolytta had this orrery. She's potentially figured it out and she might be in danger. Is that just by chance that Ruby has seen this?
Yeah.
Or is it she's purposefully spying on Leti at the request of Christine, as you say? Because you see her eyes really kind of go inquisitive when Christine says, and it involves your family.
Yeah.
Because as well, the other side of this is that Leti and Atticus tries to find out more about the Book of Names or its location because of this dream that Leti has right at the start, where she sees herself, like we've seen Atticus previously, running through the burning lodge in Ardham County with Hannah running out the front door. In this moment, Leti is pregnant, and Hannah is at the front door looking back, has a book. She's holding a book, and suddenly there is this click that Hannah actually escaped the lodge back in the day with the Book of Names, and that in some way this is still held by that side of the family, Atticus's mother's side. And so he travels to St. Louis to try and find out more information from his auntie there. And there's a little moment where he spots a similar sort of thing on his skin as well, like a marking on his skin.
He sees a photograph of her and sees a marking on her skin, and then checks his own skin, which has a very similar marking on it. Yeah,
so there's a lot connecting up here.
I don't know whether this was just my reading of it or not. It looked almost like a brand that each of them had. Now it could be like a tattoo or something like that that's passed down between them to show that they are connected. It could be a magical mark of some, you know, I'm thinking of like a Harry Potter type thing where there's this mark that's, that shows exactly who Tic is, I suppose, if anybody needs to know who he is to unlock this book. But I suppose what's interesting about that investigation is where it ends is that his mother and this friend of hers escaped from the attack on Tulsa in 1921. They got away, but not everything, none of their belongings survived. Their belongings were burnt, is what he's told anyway by this lady who lived with his mother, his friend of the family effectively. So is that accurate? Is she absolutely sure that the book didn't make it out, or is she just saying we lost everything at the time? But maybe that one thing did survive. It's a magical book after all, you know. It survived fire before, you know, in that destruction of Ardham Lodge originally. So perhaps, the book is still out there. I would hope it is, because you wouldn't bring it in at all in the show if it isn't out there, right? So this is what Tic and Leti are going to do to kind of cut off Christina. Christina might be looking for a few pages, but we have a copy of the actual book is what they think is going to happen here. So that's quite interesting. You already mentioned one of the questions I have from the episode. We have Leti tasting some food of Ruby's.
Oh, yeah.
She gets a bad reaction to it, because there's garlic in it, which instantly had me going, she's a vampire, isn't she?
Yeah, is she this vampire that you question whether she could turn into, because she did actually die and was brought back to life.
Brought back to life, exactly. So is she a vampire? Possibly, or much more logically, as her sister Ruby talks about, is she pregnant and her taste buds are changing? That's kind of more likely. But in this show, you're kind of going, is it supernatural? Is it absolutely natural that after having sex a few times with her new boyfriend that she's gotten pregnant? You know, that's probably much more likely. But again, in this show, it could go either path. And I'm not going to lean either way until we know more information. But you again mentioned the trip to St. Louis to follow up on Tic's family. And just another reference again, last week's episode was called Meet Me in Daegu, based on the song, based on the movie Meet Me in St. Louis. So this week they're going to St. Louis. So I thought that was a nice little touch. But Tic, to get this information, goes to Montrose's house, goes to his flat, and finds out all about Montrose, this time. That new confident Montrose didn't last very long from last time we saw him.
No, it really didn't. It felt like, oh my goodness, can't believe this just happened. But I mean, Sammy says it himself, you know, he's just made him a cooked breakfast, and Montrose is just, you know, I don't eat pork. These grits are too runny. And as Sammy says, the coffee's going to be too wet next. You know, what is it that you're pushing me away again? So even before Atticus comes, there's Montrose putting up this wall to Sammy because, it's the first time Sammy has stayed over at his. So on the face of it, this should all be a great positive step forward. And it ends up with Sammy just kind of going, you know, why are you doing this?
Ends up with Montrose sabotaging it, as would be expected from him. But I did think that third one where he says to him, oh, next the coffee's going to be too wet. And Montrose says to him, no, there's too much sugar in it. I thought that was going to end with a smile from Montrose, where it's a bit playful that he's always complaining about everything. But actually, you're right. He is just trying to push him away. We have that conversation between Sammy and Montrose where he says to him, while I was out at the shops, I complimented a lady there for the beautiful headscarf she had. And Montrose realizes that's the neighbor down the way and is suddenly concerned that his secret life will be exposed because he's had Sammy over and he's met one of the neighbors effectively. So again, you know, you wouldn't expect Montrose to go through this coming out that he did in episode 5 and suddenly be absolutely fine with it. It's still massively dangerous in the 50s to be a gay man in Chicago, certainly. So you wouldn't have expected to go through that. But this pushing away of Sammy instantly and constantly complaining about everything he did felt like, hey, as we mentioned before, Montrose is still an a-hole. You know, he's hasn't changed that much. He's just come out. That's all.
And arguably as well, there is the moment where Atticus is an a-hole as well, with him calling his dad a faggot. Now, whatever about, you know, the amount of emotions running through it, it's like he had that sense about it, because he did say, "Oh, so the rumors are true."
Yeah.
You know, but he does ask, did mother know about it? And he says, yes. Now, I'm not entirely sure whether that's the truth, but I suspect it is.
Yeah.
And I think that could be, absolutely the truth. It was just the way that scene played out. It felt like Montrose was paused for long enough where it was him thinking about whether he should answer yes or no.
Yeah, it was.
But I think ultimately he took the decision to say yes, because that was the truth.
Yeah.
But again, it exposes Montrose' secretive life, which is understandable for that time. And it also exposes the fairly, I don't know whether it's insurmountable, but certainly a huge gap in the relationship between Atticus and his dad.
Well, yeah.
You know, he talks to Leti afterwards, you know, and he's punched so many walls and metal doors. I mean, I do think Atticus has a significant anger issue.
Definitely.
And I think that's part of the character, and I think it's really nicely played throughout the episodes. But, you know, where he goes, all that hitting me and beating me down so that I wouldn't become soft, you know, it was that it's Montrose hiding, pushing down the thing that he is, and actually trying to be the kind of person that would be homophobic. You know, he's taking on that mantle of being homophobic himself to try and suppress his feelings. And I thought this was really just an amazing little nugget of a scene, I think.
Yeah, a brilliant performance in here, but my God, John, I mentioned it to you after watching the episode, that word, faggot, is just, it's a trigger word for me, definitely. It's one of those words that I absolutely remember being said with such venom to myself as a gay person, to other gay people, over the years of my life. The word faggot, the specific intonation that's used, and it's such venom behind the word. I absolutely couldn't care less if you called me gay, if you called me a fag, even. There's no problem. But the actual way people say faggot has so much venom in it. And Atticus subscribes to that right here. He hates his father in this moment for keeping this piece of information from him, for him not knowing this about this past of his father's, because he has got a problem with him. And he certainly has a problem with his father beating him for years, saying that you can't be soft. Effectively, the piece of the puzzle that Atticus never understood was, you can't be soft like me, because my father beat that out of me the way I'm going to beat that out of you, Atticus, is basically what we've learned from Montrose over the last few weeks. But that word is just, as I say, the worst example of a word to use in that situation. But it is an interesting moment. And again, you know, having that completely revealed to everybody, this open, relationship really between Sammy and Montrose. They know it instantly, Leti and Tic. There's no explanation, no alternative given there when they arrive on the scene. It is literally, now we know what's going on. And Leti just has the conversation with Montrose she needs to have, and gets the information out of him. And I love how Journey Smollett plays this moment when she's talking with Atticus outside, telling him I have the information, because it's that moment, like, you know, those moments when you've witnessed a family argument between one of your friends and their parents or something like that. And she's kind of going, I know I shouldn't have been there for that. It's like, it's
absolutely
dripping off every word she says. She's like, maybe if I give you the information that we came here for, maybe we can just move along. And Tic as well, is responding to her in the same way. Jonathan Majors has exactly the same kind of reaction in how he's talking back to her. It's like, I am full of rage right now, but it's not directed at you, so I'm going to hold it behind a wall and go, oh, where was it you said that was going to be? Oh, St. Louis, was it? So, really well played by the two of them in there, but really interesting scenes. I think that's it mostly for the overall, everything that happened in the episode. Atticus doesn't seem much closer to finding the book at the end of the episode. He's just returned back, as you mentioned a few times, returned back through this portal from another world, having had his own adventure, possibly. We could see that in the next episode. But interestingly, he's returned with a book called Lovecraft Country by Geroge Freeman. A tale of worlds within worlds within worlds is the tagline on it. The way I kind of think about that book that he's returned with, Geroge Freeman has been writing a handbook for travel for Black Americans to get safely across America. That's a non-fiction travel companion, effectively. It makes me feel like this version of Geroge Freeman has written a fictional book called Lovecraft Country, where horrible things happen in Lovecraft Country, which makes me feel that actually Atticus might have traveled to quite a nice, different, alternate world.
Possibly, yeah.
Where Geroge Freeman is a novel writer, is a fiction writer, where these things don't happen in real life. The things that he's writing about, he has to write them in a fiction book. So, I don't know. That was just my quick read on the 2-second look at that cover. But let's see it in the exciting adventures of Atticus the Time Traveler, or the Space Traveler, in maybe another episode.
Yeah, absolutely. I am so looking forward to the next episode. My goodness, this is a great show.
Such a great show.
Full of fantasticness and fabulousness. Cannot wait for episode 8.
Definitely. Any notes from the episode? Anything we haven't mentioned, John, that you want to just mention before we go on?
Yeah, just one. You have Leti and Ruby, who are babysitting Dee and her friends. And there's a little nod back to episode 3 with the house party, where we had the kids playing up in the attic. But this time, Bobo is missing, the young boy. He's still not come back from holiday. And of course, at the time, we got feedback pointing out that the young kid in that scene was dressed in the same way as a very infamous boy who went missing, went on holiday in Florida, where didn't go missing, he was lynched because he was accused of looking at a white girl whilst on holiday. And there's just reference here where they say that he's still not back.
Well, they reference, I can't wait till he comes back, because he's so good at this game.
Exactly.
And you know, again, after knowing that piece of information, it's kind of like, well, he's never coming back.
He's never coming back. Exactly. So, I thought that was, really, again, just this subtle touch in there, which is so meaningful. Not only to the nod back to an earlier episode, but just to that whole, horrendous thing that happened in real life.
Absolutely. I've only got one other note from the episode as well. I don't know whether you noticed this, John, in Paris, in the scenes with Josephine Baker. There is a lady that stands up to make a speech, looking very similar to painter Frida Kahlo. Yeah. They were known to have a relationship. Josephine Baker and Frida Kahlo had a relationship in the 30s. I think it was around the time that Frida broke up with her husband, was divorced from her husband. Josephine Baker and Frida Kahlo were both actually known to be bisexual, having relationships with both men and women over the time, and both of them met during this time. I love the way this was described, both of them tops in their field and unwilling to change who they were for popularity, which I love that's how it was described in the article I was reading about it. Frida Kahlo, a very, very famous painter, and Josephine Baker, a very famous dancer worldwide, both unwilling to change who they are. Love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Great little touch. That's it for the notes, I think, for the episode. I'm sure there's a ton more. We really want to hear from you. If there's anything that we've missed out on, anything you want to talk about, just email us to feedback@tvpodcastindustries.com. John, overall, what do you think of this episode?
I absolutely adored this episode. I think it's one of the best for me so far. I give this 5 dancing girls out of 5. I just thought this was really phenomenal storytelling. And I loved Hypolytta here and her journey of discovery. It's, you get a lot of journeys of discovery in TV shows and on movies, people learning something about themselves. But this really, I don't know, it struck a chord with me, I think. It really felt real. Ironically, even though it was set amongst multi-world theory and multiverse theory.
And comic books.
And in comics. It was just so well done, and from writers, the actors, the visuals, all of it was great. You know, there's a little bit of fun in Paris. There was the weirdness in Africa with the Confederate soldiers being there.
Yep.
There was the, you know, going inside their daughter's comic book, the poignancy with her husband George, and the realization of what it means to be her. I am Hypolyta. What it means to be free, and that she still realizes that, you know, all of these things are part of her, including needing to go back and look after Dee. And I thought that was just so good.
Yeah. I think that's going to make her a better mother as well. Like, it feels like she's going to be going back to Dee and will make sure that Dee is allowed to fulfill her dreams. Dee is clearly a comic book artist, clearly someone that wants to go into a really artistic field. And it feels like by Hypolyta going through this realization that she's missed out on anybody pushing for her to do what she wanted to do, and by everybody crushing her into this smaller than version of herself, it feels like she's now going to go back and be really supportive of whatever Dee wants to do with her future. Do you know what I mean? That kind of feels like that learning is, well, I may have missed out my chance, but I have a really creative, wonderful daughter that I can go back and support and let her live her life. I just think that's a little thing that may come from the episode.
Definitely. But yeah, for me, 5 dancing girls out of 5.
Excellent.
What a fantastic episode this was of Lovecraft Country.
But absolutely. Yeah. You know, this is, you know, you've already stolen that this is the best episode so far. And it seems like every week we're both saying that when we watch these episodes. They're just so good, completely unexpected when we go into the episodes as to what we're going to get when you turn on the TV for your hour-long trip into Lovecraft Country. What exactly is it going to be this week? You know, it could be an episode entirely in Korean. It could be an episode in space and time travel. It could be an episode with Shoggoths chasing them down in the woods. Maybe it's an episode where somebody transfers into somebody else's body and lives life like them for a day, you know? Something different every week. And there's only 3 more episodes left after this one. So really enjoying what they're giving to us on Lovecraft Country. Let's get into our feedback. We've got some feedback for episode 6 of Lovecraft Country. First up, Donald Dennis left his feedback over on Facebook. He says, well, that was interesting. Once again, another entirely different feel for an episode. My only ding against it, this one felt like it was a bit short on the special effects, where the budget constraints were kind of showing occasionally. Other than that, I really love the story, the pacing, the weird tales ambience, and the character development. There were some serious revelations that I would have thought would have been a bit too much in the season opening graphic effects. That's interesting. Yeah, they changed the graphics every episode. I think the episode 6 ones had the tentacles coming out of Jaya in the actual opening credits. Donald goes on to say, in all, it gives me hope for what will happen when all of the elements are woven together by the end of the season, or at least I hope they will. When we first see Jaya lighting the candles in her room, she lights one, and then the others light magically, right? How does this not freak out her victims? I mean, that's a lot of candles to light all at once.
Yeah, no, I noticed that as well, actually. I don't think we called it out on the podcast last week, but you're absolutely right. She lights one and all of them magically come on at the same time. And the guy who she's brought back sees it. It's not like he doesn't, and he's not freaked out by that. So I was kind of just wondering whether in the end they were maybe some kind of gaslight that
maybe,
you know, looked like a candle or something like that.
I wouldn't like that amount of gaslight in a paper house.
Yeah, I think I would have been a little freaked out by seeing that, to be honest, as well.
Or does he even notice it because he's there for one reason and one reason only, basically? So maybe he just doesn't even notice that that's what's happened. I do like that if you notice the next time they're in the room and they're cleaning up the room, she is putting out each individual candle one at a time. So they do make reference to that as well.
But I wonder as well, it was just a shorthand for really just communicating that this situation all was not well for that man.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Absolutely. Donald also says, if these people can afford to do that kind of cleaning and have that many candles but can't afford food, you don't think they engage in cannibalism, do you? They don't portray that at all, but Jaya is possessed by a dark spirit and seems surprised by the fish taste in her birthday meal. How much of this is covered in the book? Donald asks. I mentioned a few weeks ago I actually stopped reading the book because it was so close to what was going on in the book that I just didn't want to be spoiled. I wanted to see what the show had, and then I'll go back to the book after the season finishes and just connect and see. But this does feel like something separate from the show, but every episode feels like that when you're watching it. The book is taking things from each individual character's perspective, so I would assume that this story's in there.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly I know what I looked up and was able to glean around the legend of the Kimiho spirit is that they do feed on the flesh of the victims.
Okay.
Now, it felt more like she exploded them, really, in this, but it could be that she is feeding on them, and it depends what they need for sustenance. It could be that it's the memories ultimately that they're feeding, but I know it was the legend did talk about them devouring and consuming the flesh of their victims.
Right, but it is the soul that she's taking. That's what she has to get is 100 souls to transfer back into Jia. But I think they did reference at the beginning they do eat rice. They cook the rice for the winter, I think is what they're cooking at the beginning of the episode. So they do have something to sustain them throughout the winter.
Yeah, and I suppose it's one of those things. They can't afford food, but then they are also just candles, you know? I suppose these days we think of all these candles that cost us loads of money, but of course, back in the day, that was the only source of lighting, pretty much, other than the fire that they would have had or the stove. So it would have been a different time.
It's just wax and string.
Yeah, it would have been a different time, and you probably could have gotten them pretty easily, maybe. But certainly, I know what you mean. It was the cleaning bill I was worrying about, but that was the price to pay for getting rid of the father.
Exactly. Thanks so much for your feedback, Donald. I'm glad you enjoyed the episode as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, Donald, for the feedback. Great to get your thoughts on that, for sure.
Our next piece of feedback comes from Natalie in Canada. She sent in feedback through our website at tvpodcastindustries.com. Just click the link on the side. It's got SpeakPipe to leave up to 90 seconds of your thoughts. Take it away, Natalie.
Hey guys, this is Natalie. I'm from Canada, and I just wanted to talk about episode 6 of Lovecraft Country and Meet Me in the Daigo. I mean, it was a great episode. I've been really enjoying all the HBO shows that have been showing the other more diverse perspectives of a lot of the soldiers when they were going to all these different countries like Vietnam and Korea and how that affected them. But the real thing that I wanted to bring up was a theory or something I noticed about the episode where the whole Count of Monte Cristo, and we obviously acknowledged already the whole she only watched the movie and she didn't really know the ending, and because they've been really focusing on that book being Atticus's dad's favorite book, I think the fact that Jaya had that vision of Atticus's future and him dying, it might be a little callback to she's seen the movie of Atticus's life, but it might not necessarily be the real like text, and I don't know, just like a little foreshadowing to, even though she thinks Atticus is going to die, he probably would not. Anyway, I've enjoyed the show, and I can't wait to keep listening.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for the feedback. Really great to get your thoughts on. I'm really liking your theory that Jaya probably may have gotten a wrong interpretation of Atticus's memories just simply because she hasn't seen the whole picture, like with the movie that we saw in this episode 6. So yeah, really good.
Yeah, that's really cool. Interesting ideas, Natalie. Great to hear some more voices of our listeners. Great to hear from you there, Natalie. I know you mentioned some of the other shows on HBO that have been looking at alternate versions of Americans in conflict areas. I think the one you were mentioning there was in HBO's Watchmen as well. They went to Vietnam, and the impact that was had by having one of the major characters play a big role in Vietnam. I don't want to spoil anything for Watchmen in case you haven't seen it. But yeah, I love that they're taking these trips to very different countries in HBO shows. It seems like they have so much budget, they're able to do big moments in these shows. So yeah, definitely this episode with the time spent in Korea was so cool. Thanks so much, Natalie. It's really cool to get some feedback in through SpeakPipe as well. As I said, you can go over to the website at tvpodcastindustries.com and just click the button there. Or you can send us an email with an MP3 of your thoughts, just like our wonderful friend Steve Brown.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Natalie. I'm really rooting for your theory here because I think it sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah, thanks so much, Natalie. On to Steve Brown's feedback.
Hey, John and Derek, it's Steve. I just finished watching the latest episode of Lovecraft Country. Meet me in Daegu, and wow, powerful episode. We learn a lot of we learn about Atticus and what he did in the war. We learn about his South Korean love interest, and I wonder, are they showing us this because she's going to play deeper into the story, or are they just trying to show us this vision she had of him dying? I'm not sure. And it, just another one of those episodes that I feel like I've got to watch multiple times to really, really understand. So I really appreciate you guys' podcast on it. But, it's bittersweet to me because it's great. It was a great story seeing it as part of the season and getting to know what happened to him and that, but at the same time, we haven't really progressed forward. We got to see a little bit of the abuse that he suffered at the hands of Montrose, but at the same time, we still don't know what's going on in the present 5 years later. So very, very interesting. It was interesting from the perspective of I was stationed in Korea twice in my Air Force career. I was there from 96 to 97 and then 2006 to 2007. So I got to see a little bit of, the 50 years later after, the war had ended. And, I remember going to like a beach community and we spent a weekend there. And it was interesting to meet some of the locals who were really very appreciative of what the Americans had done, getting them out of communist oppression, or what could have been communist oppression. So, okay, I've gone way over, so talk to you later.
Always welcome to go way over, Steve. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like, how will Jaya play in this series? Is it just that nominal reference from Tic and then this episode, or will she play deeper into the story? Certainly, I think, primarily it was seeing his future and what that entails, and for the audience realizing that, okay, maybe Atticus won't get out of this, alive and well.
Yeah.
So that was, really, but again, a great story, and very powerful, the episode. I also think, like you say, I love the going to South Korea. I love, like, for example, with this one, the move to, multiverses. I love the museum one. I wonder whether maybe the next few episodes will be centered a bit more around Chicago, with something happening in Chicago.
Maybe.
Just because, I think, or maybe it's just the last two episodes, where it really just focuses on that story. So it'd be interesting to see, but at the moment I'm really liking the structure of it.
Yeah, me too. Because, I suppose one of the things with Jaya is that we've heard about the character since the beginning of the series. And now we've seen, and we've also heard about what Korea did to, Atticus. So now we've seen it. Now we've seen what happened to him there. The type of person he was there is different to the person that he was when he came home. and we've seen the experience that happened with Jaya. So I wonder whether this episode was just an explanation of who that character was that he's been talking about so often, and what effect it had on him as a person as well. So I don't know whether we'll see Jaya in future. Thanks for sharing with us your experience in the Air Force, Steve, as well. That's really interesting that you're over in Korea.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Steve, for the feedback. And
as always, thank you so much for the feedback. It's great to get your voicemails in for every episode, Steve. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And also to our fellow Dreadfuls, you can send in your thoughts, comments, or discussions on anything to do with Lovecraft Country. Mm-hmm. You've got feedback at tvpodcastindustries.com. Just send in an email there. Or like Steve, you can send a MP3 attachment through, or you can go to tvpodcastindustries.com onto the website, and there is a right-hand tab there that you can click on and leave up to 90 seconds of your thoughts. As well, we also put up spoiler posts on our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/TV Podcast Industries.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much for joining us for Lovecraft Country. We'll be back again in Lovecraft Country next week with Lovecraft Country Season 1, Episode 8. We are also covering The Boys. It is a very different show from Lovecraft Country. If you want to get all of our coverage of those episodes that come out on Friday mornings each week, you can also subscribe to us on tvpodcastindustries.com, get access to all of those episodes. Or there is a Boys from TV Podcast Industries feed for just The Boys episodes as well, if you fancy filling up your podcast feed with Lovecraft Country and The Boys and all the TV Podcast Industries episodes. We have feeds for everything we do. Thank you so much. We will talk to you next time. Looking forward to getting back to Lovecraft Country.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. We hope you stay subscribed to the podcast, but please share it with your friends. Sharing the podcast is, of course, sharing the love. And yes, fellow Dreadfuls, thank you for coming on board for another spoiler-filled discussion from myself and Derek. It's really appreciated to have you on board with the Dreadful podcast. Yes, remember though, in this time of timey-wimey travel, keep watching, keep listening, and fellow Dreadfuls, keep discovering.
Nice. Yes, go on your own journey of discovery.
Exactly.
Bye.
Bye.